Welcome to the Reel to Reel podcast, where the stories behind the board go on record. I'm your host, Bruce Hensal, with my co-host, Isra Batista from the Melrose Audio Center. And we're here today with my dear friend, David Spero, to talk about his new book. Let me see if I get the title right. My Life in the Wings, My 50-Year Love Affair.
No, it's actually
A Life in the Wings, My 50-Year Love Affair with Rock and Roll.
Right. Yeah, an English teacher, My Life in the Wings, and an English teacher corrected us and said, no, that's not the right way to say it. It should be A Life in.
So at this point, we're still listening to English teachers, huh?
You know, you do what you got to do. Exactly.
Well, it's so great to have you here, David. And
thanks, Bruce. It's really good to see you. It's been way too many years.
It has been. I got to tell you, the Upbeat Show impacted me in my formative years in Ohio. I think the thing that raised my eyebrows the most was when Funkadelic was on. The first time I'd ever seen a black man in diapers playing rock and roll.
Yeah, George Clinton wearing diapers. Yeah, absolutely. One of my father's, probably one of his least proudest moments in his television history.
Whoops.
Well, I mean, come on. There was a lot of flack for that, to tell you the truth, having a guy up there in diapers, in front of a national TV audience.
Yeah, I can't imagine. But, I mean, you were no stranger to controversy once you got on WMMS. So,
well, even earlier than that with WNCR, which was one of the first of the, underground FM stations in the country. And it really paved the way for what WMMS became.
Yeah. Well, I had a question. I know in your book you talk about being the cue card holder. Did all of the siblings have a job on the show, or?
No, I was it.
You were it.
I don't even. For some reason, I took an interest in what my dad was doing more than any of my brothers or my sister. And when I was 13, they needed somebody to hold the cue cards for the host on the show. And my dad asked if I wanted to do it. And I was like, sure, any way to get connected with this. And so I think I only missed maybe the first 2 or 3 shows. And the first show that I actually did had, I remember distinctly, it had the Dave Clark 5 on. And I was like, well, this is the coolest job in the world. I'm 13 years old and I'm hanging with the Dave Clark 5, and Marvin Gaye and Tammy Terrell and, Tommy James and the Lovin' Spoonful all in one day. Wow.
That's amazing.
It was pretty cool.
Yeah.
I wish I remembered it.
Yeah, and you don't have the excuse most of us do for forgetting the 60s and 70s at 13. So.
Yeah, I'm in my 70s. Come on,
Well, I understand, but at 13, you probably weren't indulging as much as we were in our 20s. So.
No, I waited, I think, till I was 14. That was Burton Cummings. He was the first guy to ever get me high.
Oh, no.
He's like, hey, do you smoke pot? And I'm like, well, maybe today. Okay.
There's a good trivia question. Guess who?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
That's funny.
Shaking all over, the original.
Yep. Well, I'm trying to recall exactly the first time when we met, and I believe it was during Michael Stanley's Friends and Legends record in Colorado.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Because we were out in Colorado doing that record, and Joe Vitale, of course, was the drummer, and, you and Joe were always around together, and, I remember going out there. I'd become his manager like an hour before he started that record. And, Walsh, who put everything together, including me and Michael, had said, well, you need to come out to Colorado and see what it's all about, and listen to the music. And all of a sudden I had a management career.
Wow. Yeah, that was a crazy time with that record. I was there with Stills in Manassas, living in Colorado.
That's right. Oh, that's right.
And
Paul Harris played on the album, and Al Perkins played on the album, and I don't remember if Chris Hillman was on that or not.
I don't think he was. I think that was a little bit of a turbulent time for Chris domestically.
Oh, okay.
And but I do remember Paul playing, and the little jam, Funky as the Drummer, and you had the Paul Harris Explosion T-shirt.
That's right. Take it to the bridge.
Yep. That was really good.
And you're still in touch with Paul quite a lot, right?
Yeah. It's been nearly a month, but he has his, well, as you well know, he has his phases, and sometimes he's very lucid, and then other times he's just rambling. Right. It's a shame, but what a talent!
Those were amazing times. I remember the studio we were at was right across the street from the Coors factory. Right. And in Ohio, Coors wasn't available then. It was really only available in Colorado, and it was like this. There was this mystique surrounding Coors, even though it was just like, there was no punch to it. That was for sure. It was light beer before there was light beer. And we used to go across the street to the tasting room, throw down a few, come back to the studio.
Yeah, I think that mystique developed because of Smokey and the Bandit, wasn't that?
That's right. That's right.
He made the run to Colorado to get to Coors and bring it east of the Mississippi.
Rosie says hi.
Hi, Rosie. How you doing?
Hey, Rosie, come here. She wanted to let me know I wasn't paying attention to her.
Hey, excuse me. Hey, David, how you doing? I'm Isra from the Melrose Center. Hey,
yeah.
I have a question, actually. I don't want to interrupt too much, but I was wondering, like, you being surrounded by so many artists and so many musicians at such a young age, why didn't you maybe choose to become the artist? Like, why do you rather go in all these different routes?
I tried.
Okay.
My brother and I, we used to sit there with a couple guitars playing Beatles songs and trying to work out harmonies and all that. And, he wanted to become a pretty successful songwriter in his day, working with on that side of it, in the creative side. And my dad had taken me to see the Beatles at Public Hall here in Cleveland, 1964. And I remember standing on the side of the stage with him, and across the stage from us was Brian Epstein. And I was watching Brian. He had his arms folded, and he's just like, he never watched the stage. He only watched the audience. And I remember thinking to myself, I wonder what that guy does, and I asked my dad, I said, who is that? He goes, well, that's Mr. Epstein. He's the Beatles manager. I said, well, what does he do? And he kind of explained to me what a manager does and all that. And I said, well, how come he never, he doesn't watch his band? He just watches the audience. He says, well, why don't you ask him? So after the show, he introduced me to Brian Epstein. And I said, I was watching you during the show. You never watched your band. And he goes, well, I trust what they do, but I always watch the audience because the response to me is what's more important. And if there's a time when they're relaxing and sitting down or something, I got to think, maybe that song's in the wrong place, or maybe it's the wrong song, or whatever it is. And as we went home that evening, I was like, I can't do what they do, but maybe I could do what he does. And it was something that always interested me. When the bands came to do Upbeat, I always hung with the manager, and asked what he was doing and all of that. And when I was on the radio on MMS, Walsh used to come and hang out with me all the time. He's a huge radio fan. And he said one day, he goes, well, you're not going to be doing this when you're 20, are you? And I'm like, well, I'm sure nobody does radio when they're in their 20s, And he said, I think you should become a manager. I think you have what it takes to be an artist manager. And he introduced me to Michael Stanley, and he said, this will be your first artist. And when you're ready, I'll be your next one. And he was true to his word. And at a certain point, I got a call from Joe, and he goes, hey, man, are you ready? And I had totally forgotten that conversation. And I said, like, ready for what? He goes, to manage me. And I'm like, well, yeah, see you tomorrow. Rest was history.
Yes, it was. A lot of history.
Yeah.
I remember a night in the early 90s in Orlando when I came down from Tallahassee to see Joe at Wolfman Jack's. And
oh, my God, what an amazing... Wolfman had his Christmas show that he used to tape in October.
Right.
And that was quite an evening. It was Mickey Dolenz was there, the Chambers Brothers. I know there were more than that, but I specifically remember going back to Jack's house that night. You were there.
Yes, sir.
With a table full of cocaine, and Joe and the Wolfman getting into this intense conversation about where music started and where's it going that went on for a few hours. And it was probably one of the most hysterical nights I had spent in a long time. I actually have it all on video. I had set my camera up on the dining room table facing Joe and Wolfman. And you walk by every now and then, Bruce. I saw it just the other night. I was thinking about that, knowing I was going to talk to you. And it was,
well,
that was quite a night. I remember Joe screwing with Mickey Dolenz and introducing himself to Mickey and go, man, you guys changed my life. When Meet the Monkees came out, that was like the most important album, and the Monkees' second album, and Rubber Monkeys, was that the one? Rubber Monkeys, and Mickey's just looking at him like he's crazy, and Joe kept it going that whole night. When you guys did the White album, the White Monkey album, and Mickey never knew. Years later, he asked me, did Joe really think we were the Beatles? I said, yeah, in many ways.
That's great. Well, I think one of the other things that happened that night was Jack had a guest spot on Swamp Thing, and he had the script for his appearance, and Joe decided to coach him on that. And I believe that they ran lines.
Yes, I think they did. Yeah, absolutely.
Double entendre intended.
Right. Yes.
For half of the night on that show. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was funny.
Damn, it's good to see you, Bruce.
It's great to see you, David. Great to talk to you.
Yeah. We've lost so many over the last few years, and friends for both of us, dear friends. So yes, it's always good to see someone I haven't seen for a long time.
That's great. Well, back to your book. I want to hear how you're responsible for putting the Eagles back together again.
Well, that's kind of a myth, It's it started. I was working with Joe, and out of nowhere one day I get a call from Glenn Fry, and I hadn't talked to Glenn since the Eagles had split. And he says, "Hey man, there was that restaurant you always just take the Eagles to, in Cleveland. It was a rib place. And I said, oh, yeah, I remember that place, Harvey's Ribs. And he goes, well, listen, my band's coming into town. Do you think we could get in there and have dinner, meet for dinner? And I said, sure, when? And he goes, well, how about tonight, like 7:00? I'm like, okay. So I call over there, and they have a private room in the back, which is where we used to all go hang out. And they said it was available, and I told Glenn I'd meet him at 7. And strangely enough, like 5 minutes to 7, the bus pulls up. I figured, it'd be 9:00 before I saw them. And Glenn gets out, big hello. We all go into the restaurant and everything. And he tells the band to sit at one end, and me and Glenn sit at the other. And he's like, so what are you doing? You still on the radio? And I said, well, no, I manage Joe now. And he said, Joe Cocker? And I said, no, Walsh. And he goes, you know what? I don't even want to hear that name. And I said, why? He said, well, I've been trying to get in touch with him for a long time. And I was told he wanted nothing to do with me. And I was like shocked. I said, well, that's very interesting, because we've been working on this new record, and he thought you were the perfect person to be part of this record on this song. And I called trying to, get in touch with you. And I was told the exact same thing. You wanted nothing to do with Joe. He said, I've never said that in my life. I said, I don't think Joe has either. Turns out we were both talking to the same person who you know well. And, the last thing he would have wanted was Joe and Glenn getting together for anything. And Glenn had a couple days off in Cleveland, and his show wasn't doing well. He'd sold maybe, 150 tickets in a 300-seat room, which in itself was very depressing. And it just kind of hit me. I said, hey, if you and Joe would go out together with one band, I'm not talking about somebody opening. I'm talking about you guys being in the same band and doing all of your stuff and Joe's stuff and all the Eagles stuff that you guys were part of. I think 1 + 1 is 3. And I think you guys are playing like 15,000 seaters instead of 300 seaters. And Joe was playing a show there soon too. He was playing at like a 1,200 seat room, and maybe had sold 600 tickets. So I said to Glenn, hey, our friend Michael Stanley is on the radio now. Why don't we go do his show, and you can hype yours at the Agora and, hopefully sell the thing out. So he goes, well, yeah, sure. So I called up Michael and I said, hey, Glenn's in town. Can he come over and do your radio show tomorrow afternoon and try to sell some tickets? So once we got over there, I brought it up to him a couple more times, and he goes, too much water under the bridge. I just don't see it happening, and I don't know that anybody wants to see it, but I really believed in it. And once I took Glenn up to the radio station, I went down to my car, because you couldn't take your phone out of your car back then. And I called Joe, and I said, hey, Joe, listen, we're not doing well with tickets in Cleveland. In about 10 minutes, can you call Michael Stanley's radio show? Here's the number. And he's like, sure, I'll call and hype the show. So I walked back up into the studio, and Michael's interviewing Glenn, and the hotline rings in the radio station. And the producer holds up a sign to Michael saying, Joe Walsh is on line 2. And he goes, whoa, hold on a second, Glenn. You'll never guess who's calling right now. And he goes, hey, Joe, how are you? And he goes, hey, man, what's going on, Michael? I guess nobody wants to see my show, so I'm hyping it. He goes, well, you'll never guess who's sitting here. And Joe's like, who? Because I never told Joe. He goes, Glenn Frey. And Glenn's like giving me the finger through the window, like giving me that Glenn look, that Glenn look,
Yep.
And the next thing I know, Joe and Glenn are having this conversation about how much they miss each other and how they've been trying to get in touch with each other. And, maybe we should try to do something in the future and all that. And after the interview, Glenn comes over to me and goes, this may work. I don't know how, but let me think about it. And about 3 weeks later, I get a call from Glenn, and he was playing out in Los Angeles at the Universal Amphitheater, which I think held about 3,000 people or something. And he hadn't sold many tickets for it. He goes, why don't we try it with this show? So I called up Joe and I told him the situation. And he's like, sure, that sounds like a great idea. Let's do it. And I called up, I can't remember who it was, the morning team on one of the big radio stations in LA. And I said, hey, would you have Glenn Fry and Joe Walsh on your show tomorrow? They're going to be doing a concert together and they're going to announce it. And they were like, of course, are you kidding? 2 Eagles, you know? And they went on the radio the next morning, and the show sold out before they got off the air. In fact, we didn't have time to pull tickets for winners. We ended up putting the winners on the side of the stage because we didn't have any seats left. And after that show, Glenn and I sat down and talked, and he goes, well, you know, do you want to do this? And I said, yeah. And Joe was coming down to Florida to play a couple of corporates right after the first of the year. This was in November. And I said, hey, you know, we got a couple corporates on 2 weekends, you know, with a week in between with nothing to do. So I said, you know, why don't I call a promoter that I know down there and see if we could book shows in the middle, and I'll call the promoters that are doing these private events, see if I can get more money because the two of you were doing it. Everything worked out. We ended up doing, let's see, I think we did Tampa, or it was, yeah, I think it was Tampa. I don't think we did Orlando. And we did Fort Lauderdale, and we did St. Petersburg. And all 3 shows sold out in a heartbeat. And then we, you know, went to an agency and had them book it, and we booked a tour that for that summer, and I think we did about 35-40 dates. And towards the end of it, I was getting calls from Irving Azoff saying, you know, Henley wanted to stop by and see a show and all that, and Glenn's going, no, you know, the Eagles without those 2 guys is really fun, you know. And then we were doing an event in Aspen that Glenn does. It was used to do every year, a fundraiser to raise money for kids. And he really wants to be a part of this. And said, well, it was a really fun night. It used to be the China Club. I don't remember what it was. Maybe he wants to come out and he'll play with us. And the audience is like, whoa, you know. And then Henley walks out, and the place went absolutely crazy. And, you know, the next thing we know, Irving's got a meeting set up with everybody at his house in Aspen that night. He threw a big party for, you know, anybody whose name you would recognize. And about 10, I mean, nobody knew where they went. And at some point, my wife and I went back to our hotel. I just figured Joe's a big boy. He can get home, you know. And I get a call from Glenn at 7 o'clock in the morning. He said, there's a car waiting downstairs. Don't take a shower. Just get in the car and come over here. I said, what's going on? He said, just get in the car and come over here. So I thought, oh, this can't be good. So I called Joe's room and I said, hey, man, what happened last night? He goes, I'm sleeping. I said, well, Glenn just called and told me to come over to his house. What's going on? He says, I don't care. And he, you know, hangs up the phone. Well, now I'm really a wreck. So I get over to Glenn's house and he throws a pad of paper at me and a pen and he goes, start writing. And I said, well, what happened? He goes, we're gonna do the Eagles. And I'm like, Glenn had said every night he would always say, don't get your hopes up, Spero. This is what we got and we're doing fine, you know? And I took all these notes, which ended up becoming the, you know, kind of the forebearer of the contract for Hell Freezes Over. But, I mean, as far as me having something directly to do with all of them getting back together, I can't take credit for that and certainly won't. But the fact that getting Joe and Glenn together and being at that party with Henley and all that, that was certainly the first giant step to Hell Freezes Over.
Yep. That was...
And I must say, once they got that together, it was suggested that my services were no longer needed. And Glenn stood up for me, and he said, no, if David's not involved in this, then I'm not. And of course, that was life-changing for me to go out and tour with a band like the Eagles, and open so many more doors. Those damn Eagles. But I'd been surrounded by them since they started. Some of the first Michael Stanley shows, in fact, down your way, I remember we played Akron Civic Theater. It was the Eagles when their first album came out, and Michael was the support act as a 3-piece acoustic show. And Irving had put us on a few more because he was helping me with Michael Stanley Band, because Bill Simzik was the producer. And then once Bill started producing the Eagles, I think we did most of the One of These Nights tour, and we did some dates on the Hotel California tour as well. So they were always around. In fact, Michael Stanley and I sing on the Border, or not sing, we're the hand claps on the Border. We were out in LA when they were doing that album, and Bill, went to visit Bill, and he said, hey, perfect timing, we need to do hand claps. And he set up a microphone in the men's room with the good echo. And, Michael and I and one of the other engineers went into there and did those weird hand claps on the Border. So, I mean, I was in the Eagles before I ever knew about it, uncredited. We were called the Clapettes.
Yeah, I remember when Joe and Glenn were touring together, and they were rehearsing at an amphitheater in Pensacola, and I was living in Tallahassee.
Right. Yep.
And I drove down to see you all. And I believe Joe was going to England for some reason, and I think Smokey called me and said, can you take him to the airport? And I said, sure. And so I took Joe to the airport, and I believe he was flying to meet Ringo. And I believe that's
right. Yes.
one of the first steps in his sobriety.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
And I remember that morning like it was yesterday.
Yeah. It's interesting. I'd gotten a call from Joe's ex-wife, Jody. You have to tell Joe that he's not going to see his daughter anymore. Oh. And I'm like, excuse me? I don't think that's part of my job description. And she told me that the last time Joe and his daughter were together, she was really scared to be with him because he was, inebriated and driving, and she was really freaked out about it. And I think more than anything, more than the fact that, the Eagles tour was going to come up and it was determined that everybody was going to be clean and sober for that tour if it was going to work. In fact, the Walsh and Fry tour, we were trying to come up with a name of it, and Glenn wanted to call it the NBA tour, No Blow Allowed. And we ended up calling it the POT tour, P-O-T, Party of Two.
Right. I think I still have a laminate from that tour. I think,
the idea of not being able to see his daughter again. Oh, yeah. I have a big garbage can full of them. But I think that was the determining factor for Joe was, you know what, I really need to do something. And he knew it. He talked about it. He was talking about it more and more. And it saved his life. There's no doubt. It was pretty intense time.
Well, and I also think it sent him to a new level of maturity in terms of his songwriting and his playing. that I don't know that he would have reached if he was still wandering in that abyss.
Yeah, the first performance that he did live when he was sober, we did something at the House of Blues in LA. And I remember I'd called Ringo and I'd called David Crosby and a couple of his other on the other side very, very well, and asked if they could come down to support Joe, not go on stage with him, but just kind of be with him before the show started. And we had a really good showing of those people. And it turned out to be a pretty historic day for Ringo. In fact, while we were together, he gets a phone call and he goes and he takes the phone call and he comes back and he says, "I just got news that's so secret I can't even tell myself." And we're like, what is this? And he goes, "I can't talk about it." And then, of course, like 2 weeks later, we find out that Paul and Ringo and George had gotten together and had some tracks of John's. And that's when they recorded Free as a Bird. Wow. So it was kind of cool to be there at that moment when he got the call, and it was pretty exciting, I thought, for them to do that. Did you work with Ringo at all? I mean, I know you've spent time with him, but.
No, I didn't. Just always been a major fan, but
hard not to be.
I never had. Yeah, I never had the opportunity.
When I was at the Rock Hall, I used to do these interview shows every other week, and called the Legend Series. And I did a show with Sir George Martin once. And I asked him, I said, of all the stuff that went down with the Beatles, I said, is there anything that sticks out as being, the holy crap moment? Like, oh my God, And he goes, yeah, I think the thing that stands out for me more than anything is of all the hundreds and hundreds of tracks that we recorded, only once did we stop a track because Ringo made him that. And how many thousands of hours you've spent in the studio, and I've spent my share of time there too. However many year period it was, they stopped a take because of me. True sign of his talent.
Yeah. Well, Isra, you got any more questions for David?
Actually, I do.
Bring them on.
So I noticed that most of your career, like your book said with the rock and roll, what was so intriguing about the rock and roll scene rather than, let's say more like R&B or pop at that time? Why the rock and roll? Like what was that, like the thing that brought you in? Or was it because that's what you were exposed to?
Well, I mean, fortunately, because of Upbeat, I was exposed to jazz. Miles Davis did Upbeat, and some of the other great jazz players, Jimmy Smith and Roland Kirk, they would do the show. Every Motown and Stax Volt act did Upbeat. So, I was surrounded by the Four Tops and the Supremes and Otis Redding and Marvin Gaye. And musical spectrum was very, very career. I worked with Sam Moore from Sam and Dave, and I worked. But I mean, rock and roll to me, I mean, I'm a child of the '50s. That's what I grew up with, and that's when I turned on my radio. That's what I heard. But when I started doing radio, for some reason, I kind of teetered over to the softer side of it. I was the guy that played Cat Stevens and Crosby, Stills and Nash and Joni Mitchell and Linda Ronstadt the Eagles and all of that stuff. So, it was, we just broke up for a second there, but anyhow, it was just part of my DNA by that part. I mean, the Beatles, the Stones, the Who, the Kinks, the Zombies. That was my schooling. I never, because I had what I thought was my calling, which was being a disc jockey, and so that brought me into the whole musical land. And it was Joe who had suggested I become a manager and took me out to LA, and I lived with him for a while, and I followed his manager around and learned the business firsthand. And so I think it was just a natural evolution, but it wasn't because I wasn't into the other music. I very much was and still am today. And it's just what it was. Those were I guess had it been Jimmy Cliff or somebody like that had made that comment, and I would have ended up, getting into the reggae world, which I did later on with Toots and the Maytals. It was just, everything kind of just happened by chance. There were and as I look back, there's no coincidences. I got on the radio. I was playing Cat Stevens. We became friends because I was the disc jockey that, played him before a lot of other disc jockeys did. And now I'm actually working on a brand new project with him for a musical. So Bruce, we started way back in the early 70s together. And here we are in 2022, and, we're still connected. Same way with a lot of those same musicians.
Exactly. And I think when we were coming up, there was really no pop music. Pop music was Bobby V and Bobby Darin and a crooner in a suit. And if you didn't have a suit on, you were a rocker.
You're exactly right. Right. And even the Beatles wore suits. So,
Exactly.
You're right. And you know what? It was like the radio station we listened to played every kind of music. They played all the Motown stuff. They would play Take 5 by Dave Brubeck or something. And, as a result of that, we all kind of got exposed to a lot of things. And then when we started doing FM radio the way that we were doing it, and we had no idea what we were doing, to tell you the truth. We just kind of did it by rote. We would introduce little classical pieces. There might be an Eric Satie piece that you put in between Led Zeppelin and Joni Mitchell that works, or, a Cheech and Chong piece, or a George Carlin piece, or, we brought everything together. And on the radio, we played Herbie Hancock, and we played Mahavishnu, John McLaughlin, and things that were much more jazzier or, had different musical components to it. I got bit by a bug sitting out here, so I'm going to keep scratching my forehead. Goes away.
So you're out in your lovely backyard, eh?
Yeah. For some reason, my Zoom calls are out here. It just seems I'm probably connected to 13 different networks or something, But it works good. It's comfortable, and the phone doesn't ring. The dog still barks, but
Great. Yes, Ohio.
I missed that. Oh yeah. Well, it's supposed to be near 100 today, so the morning's a good time to be out.
Yes, you got that. Well, I other than letting our listeners know where they can get their hands on your book, I'm about out of questions. Especially Isra, do you have any more for David? Well, I think we're going to let you go, David.
All right. Well, I just want to let everybody know that they can go to Amazon and pick up my book, A Life in the Wings. Or I know Borders has it on there online and other bookstores and stuff like that. So I really appreciate the time, and it's so great to see you, Bruce. We'll talk soon.
David, great. You got it.
Thanks.
Well, thank you for joining us on the Reel to Reel podcast from the Melrose Center. I'm your host, Bruce Hensal, with my co-host, Isra Batista, and we'd like to thank our guest, David Spero. And thank you to Carol Hensel for our theme music.